The music didn't just fade, it was murdered. One moment the air was filled with polite laughter and the clinking of champagne, flutes. The next, a suffocating silence fell over the grand ballroom. Every eye was on us. My father, Robert, a man who measured love in stock prices and social, was standing before me, his face a mask of purple fury. His voice, a low hiss, was meant for me alone but was amplified by the dead quiet. "Get out," he seethed. "You are not welcome here." I stood my ground, my arm locked with my fiancé Alex Thorne, a man whose real name my family had never bothered to learn. Alex didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or make a threat. He simply shifted his weight, a subtle movement that was somehow more commanding than a shout. His gaze drifted from my father's face, past my brother, and settled on a man standing near the head table, my brother's new father-in-law, a prominent defense contractor. A cold professional focus settled in Alex's eyes, and in that moment, the entire power dynamic of the room seemed to bend around him. My father's rage faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He had no idea who he was talking to. It had all started 3 weeks earlier, with a phone call that felt like a final verdict. My father's tone was clipped, devoid of any warmth. He formally uninvited me from the wedding of my brother Mark, the family's golden boy who wore his charisma like a shield. His words were precise, each one a perfectly sharpened blade. "You're dead in this family, Anya," he stated, as if reading a quarterly report. "Your life choices are a constant embarrassment. We simply can't have you there," bringing down the tone of the event. I just stood there, phone pressed to my ear, a statue of practiced composure. He went on, gushing about Mark's 7-figure success and his fiancée's powerful family. He contrasted it with my life, with my career, the one he called my boring government paperwork job. It was the same dismissal I'd heard when I chose a difficult major in college. The same condescension I'd received when I accepted my first government posting instead of a corporate one. Years of being told my path was lesser, that my quiet dedication was a failure, all culminated in this one sterile phone call. He was erasing me. He hung up, leaving me with the familiar sting of being erased. He thought he was cutting out a family failure. He had no idea he'd just disowned the very intelligence analyst, the Department of the Navy, tasks with creating threat profiles on men exactly like his son's new father-in-law. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the two lives I was living. To understand the chasm between their perception and my reality, you have to go back to the last family dinner I ever attended. It was at a high-end steakhouse, the kind with dark wood paneling and waiters who hovered just out of sight. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and my brother Mark's self-satisfaction. He was holding court, as always, recounting the story of a hostile takeover his firm had just engineered. He spoke in a booming voice, using acronyms like EBITDA and M and A, as if they were feats of mythic heroism. My father, Robert, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a pride I had never once seen directed at me. He saw Mark's life, the bonuses, the bravado, the ruthless corporate climbing, as the absolute pinnacle of success. I waited for a pause in Mark's monologue, a small pocket of air in the suffocating atmosphere of his ego. I had just received the Joint Service Commendation Medal, a significant honor for my analytical work that had quietly prevented a brewing international incident. It wasn't a flashy story, there were no stock options involved, but it was important. It was real. "That's amazing, Mark," I said, my voice sounding small in the noisy restaurant. "I actually have some good news too. I was awarded a commendation medal last week for..." Before I could finish, my father reached across the table and patted my hand, a gesture that was meant to look kind but felt like a gag order. "That's nice, sweetie," he said, his eyes already flicking back to Mark. "Mark, tell us more about the real world." The real world. The words hung in the air, another entry in a long ledger of dismissals. I thought of the 19-hour days I'd spent tracking illicit financial networks, the gut-wrenching moment I had to make a call based on incomplete data, knowing lives were on the line. That was my world. It was a world that didn't get celebrated with champagne but was measured in quiet successes and disasters averted. To them, I was just Anya, the quiet one, the academic. Their nickname for me, ever since I'd preferred books to parties in high school, was the librarian, a harmless little joke that slowly became my entire identity in their eyes. A dusty, irrelevant footnote in the exciting novel of my brother's life. My actual reality was a universe away from that steakhouse. It existed in a place they couldn't imagine. A sensitive compartmented information facility, or SCIF. There are no windows in a SCIF. The only light is the cold blue glow from dozens of monitors each, one streaming a torrent of classified data from around the globe. The air is chilled and hums with the sound of servers, a constant, low thrum of information being processed. It was in one of these rooms, surrounded by the most elite special operators in the world, that I truly existed. These men, including my fiancé Alex, didn't see a librarian. They saw the architect of their missions. I remember one briefing in particular. The air was thick with a tension you could taste. A high-value target had gone dark, and the team was on a razor's edge. I stood before them, a map of a remote hostile city projected behind me. My voice was calm and steady, a counterpoint to the life-or-death stakes on the screen. The target's comms are dark, but his financial forensics are screaming, I explained, pointing to a complex network diagram. We've built a full SIGINT package that places his key facilitator at these coordinates. In this building, 3rd floor. I looked directly at Alex, whose operational call sign was Ghost. Ghost, your insertion window is 0400. This is a go-no-go based on your team's assessment of this intel. The men in that room, hardened warriors who had seen the worst of humanity, listened with an absolute, unwavering focus. There was no condescension, no dismissive pats on the hand. There was only respect. Alex, a legend in a world my father could only read about in thriller novels, just nodded. That single, silent gesture from him was a validation more powerful than any parental approval I had ever craved. My analysis wasn't a hobby. It was the difference between a successful operation and a catastrophic failure. In that room, I wasn't a footnote. I was the author. The dynamic was co-signed in her own quiet way by my mother, Helen, a woman who treated family peace like a fragile antique that must be preserved at all costs. I called her a few days after that dinner just to hear her voice. I tried to explain how Dad's comment had felt. She sighed, a familiar, tired sound. "Oh, Anya, you know how your father is," she said, her voice laced with a gentle plea. "He just wants to be proud. And Mark's life is so much more straightforward. It's easier for him to brag about. Just keep the peace. Let your brother have the spotlight. Let him have it, as if it wasn't something he already bathed in, hoarding every last photon of approval in our family." Her version of peace was my silence. Her version of family was my invisibility. For years I let them call me the librarian. I kept my worlds separate for national security, but also because I knew they'd never understand it. But when my father tried to publicly delete me from the family ledger, he forgot. One critical piece of intel: librarians know where all the secrets are kept, and my fiancé is the man who acts on them. After the call ended, I let the silence hang in my apartment for a long time. The initial sting of my father's words, that cold, final dismissal, burned in my chest. For years I had absorbed these moments, filing them away in a mental ledger of slights and paper cuts. I had always chosen peace, chosen to be the bigger person, chosen to remain invisible to avoid conflict. But this time was different. This wasn't just another forgotten birthday or a condescending comment. This was a formal erasure, an official declaration that I did not matter, and as the emotional storm began to subside, something else took its place. It was a feeling I knew well from my professional life, a cold, quiet clarity. The hurt didn't vanish, but it crystallized into a single, hard point of focus. My analytical mind took over, the same part of me that sifts through chaos to find patterns and vulnerabilities. This was no longer a family squabble to be endured. It had become a strategic problem to be solved. My goal was not revenge. It was a public correction of the record, executed, using the very system of rules and consequences they claimed to respect. My father and brother worshipped power and status, but they were amateurs. They only saw the flashy, superficial kind. I, on the other hand, understood the real infrastructure of power, the quiet, invisible kind that can make or break a man overnight. My brother's future father-in-law, Mr. Harrison, was a major defense contractor. His entire empire, and the respect my family so craved by association, was built on his company's lucrative contracts with naval special warfare. The linchpin holding it all together was his high-level security clearance, an asset more valuable than all of my brother's stock options combined. And clearances are fragile things. They are built on an assumption of stability and sound judgment, and they can be jeopardized by any public incident that suggests a security risk, especially an incident witnessed by a Tier 1 operator. That night, I laid out the entire situation for Alex. I didn't cry or rage. I presented it like I would a mission briefing, calmly, methodically, pointing out the variables and the key vulnerability. He listened, his expression growing grim, his jaw tight. He understood immediately. As my fiancé, he had an undeniable, unimpeachable right to accompany me. His presence wouldn't just be as my partner, he would be a walking, talking instrument of official authority, a human representation of the world they didn't know I belonged to. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a fierce loyalty. "We do this my way," he said, his voice low and steady. "Quietly, until it's not quiet anymore. We go in, we stand our ground, and I handle the fallout." We didn't need an invitation. My fiancé's rank and service record were the only please reply the system would recognize. They had planned a party to celebrate a superficial merger of two families. They were about to host a full security audit instead. Walking into that ballroom felt like crossing a border into a foreign country where I was the only one without a passport. The reception was in full swing, a symphony of clinking glasses, orchestrated, laughter, and a band playing something upbeat and forgettable. My brother Mark was on the dance floor with his new wife, spinning her around, the star of his own perfect movie. My father Robert was holding court by the bar, his voice booming as he told a story, his audience of guests laughing on cue. He was in his element, the proud patriarch of a dynasty he believed he had built. Then we entered, and it was as if someone had slowly turned a dial, draining the sound from the room. It started as a ripple. A few heads turned, then a few more. Alex wore a perfectly tailored suit, but he moved with an unmistakable economy of motion, a quiet purpose that commanded attention in a way my brother's loud charisma never could. He wasn't trying to be seen, he was simply present, and his presence was enough to make the air grow heavy. A hush fell over the conversations, the band faltered, and suddenly, the only sound was the faint clink of ice in a glass. We were anomalies. A problem the carefully planned equation of the evening couldn't solve. I took a steadying breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. My father spotted us. His jovial mask cracked, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of disbelief, quickly consumed by a tidal wave of pure rage. He stormed toward us, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He didn't care about the dozens of watching eyes. This was his kingdom, and we were invaders. "I told you that you are not welcome here," he snarled, his voice a venomous whisper that cut through the silence. "Have you no shame? Get out." He reached for my arm, his fingers curled into a claw, his intent to physically drag me out clear. But his hand never made it. Alex intercepted the move with a motion so fluid and precise it was almost invisible. He didn't touch my father. He simply placed his body between us, an immovable barrier of calm, solid presence. It was a silent, absolute negation of my father's authority. The last notes from the band died. The music was officially over. My father stood there, his hand frozen in midair, sputtering, his public humiliation now complete. He had tried to make a scene, and a scene had been made, just not the one he intended. In his world, rage was a tool of power. In Alex's world, it was just noise. Alex's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm. It wasn't loud, but it carried across the silent room, with the chilling clarity of a final judgment. He didn't even look at my father. His eyes were fixed on the bride's father, Mr. Harrison, who was watching the scene unfold with a growing sense of dread. "Mr. Harrison," Alex began, his tone polite but edged with steel. "I'm Commander Alex Thorne. You and I need to have a serious conversation about Operation Security." The professional jargon landed like a series of detonations in the festive atmosphere. "Your new son-in-law's unsecured financial dealings and affiliations have put him on a watch list. My fiancé, Dr. Sharma, is the senior analyst who flagged him." A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Harrison went pale, the color draining from his face as if a plug had been pulled. The implications of those words, the threat to his contracts, to his clearance, to his entire empire, were hitting him all at once. Then, Alex slowly turned his gaze to my father. The polite tone was gone, replaced by something colder, heavier. "You called her an embarrassment," he said, the words dropping like stones into a deep well. "Sir, with all due respect, Dr. Sharma's boring paperwork job involves briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff on threats to this nation. The intelligence packets she builds are the reason men like me come home alive." He took a step closer. "She holds a TSI clearance you couldn't dream of qualifying for. You didn't disown a daughter. You disowned a national asset. You will stand down. That is your only warning." The silence that followed was absolute. My father stared, his mouth slightly agape, his mind frantically trying to process what he'd just heard. I could see the exact moment the gears clicked into place, the name Thorne, the title commander, the quiet, lethal authority. He was connecting it to the hushed whispers and legends he'd read about, the stories of an operator known only as the Ghost. My brother Mark looked utterly lost, a confused child watching his perfect sandcastle get washed away by a tide he never saw coming. The foundation of their world, of status, of money, of perceived power, had just been obliterated by a quiet statement of fact. My father had spent his life teaching me the importance of status. In the end, it only took 27 words for him to finally learn who held the real authority in the room. We didn't stay for the fallout. We didn't wait for the frantic whispers, the accusations, or the inevitable implosion of my brother's perfect day. After Alex's words fell into the chasm of silence he had created, we simply turned and walked away. Every eye in that ballroom followed us as we crossed the floor, but I didn't feel their gaze. For the first time in my life, in a room filled with my own family, I felt completely and utterly seen, not as they wanted me to be, but as I was. Walking out of that door felt less like an exit and more like a liberation. We left behind a crater of cold, hard reality, the smoldering wreckage of a party built on lies. The carefully constructed facade had been shattered, and my brother's new life was now inextricably linked to a federal security investigation he was too arrogant to have ever seen coming. 6 months later, I stood in a world that was the complete opposite of that lavish ballroom. I was in a secure, windowless conference room deep within the Pentagon, a place defined not by wealth or status, but by duty and consequence. The air was still and respectful. I was at a podium, accepting the Director of National Intelligence's meritorious unit citation on behalf of my team. I spoke about our work in sanitized, official terms, but the people in this room understood the true meaning behind the carefully chosen words. They knew the risks, the sacrifices, and the stakes. When I finished, the room erupted in a genuine, heartfelt standing ovation. I looked out at the faces of my true peers, analysts, officers, and operators. These were the people who had been in the trenches with me, who valued my mind, and who trusted my judgment with their lives. In the front row, Alex was beaming, his pride more radiant than any spotlight my father had ever tried to shine on my brother. He was in his formal dress whites, a stark and stunning symbol of the world we shared. This was my family. A family not of blood and obligation, but of competence, shared purpose, and mutual respect. It was a foundation far stronger than any my father had ever built. Then, a few weeks after the ceremony, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender's name, my father's, leapt out at me. For a second, my heart tightened with an old, familiar instinct. But the subject line stopped me cold. It just said, "I need your help." I opened it, my hand steady. The email was short, stripped of all its usual bluster and arrogance. It was the message of a defeated man. The DOD investigation into Harrison's company had been swift and brutal, costing them their most lucrative naval contract. The fallout had implicated my brother Mark in his father-in-law's creative accounting, and Mark's firm had suspended him indefinitely. My father's carefully constructed world of inherited status and reflected glory was collapsing around him. He was asking, begging really, if I could talk to someone or explain the situation to clear their names. He, the man who had called my career an embarrassment, was now asking me to leverage that very career to save them. I read the email twice, and I felt nothing. There was no surge of triumph, no desire for revenge. The fiery anger that had fueled me for years had burned itself out, leaving behind only the calm, quiet peace of a battle finally over. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to my personal lawyer with a simple 2-line directive. Please draft a response outlining my terms for any future communication. All contact to be initiated through you. Then, with a final, deliberate click of the mouse, I moved my father's email into my archive folder. The message vanished from my screen. I took a slow sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest, and turned my full attention back to the classified mission briefing that was waiting for me. My work, my real life, was calling. My father believed a legacy was something you inherit. I learned a true legacy is something you build in silence and have acknowledged in public. If you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it, share your story below. In this community, your expertise is always recognized.